Welcome to ClickPoint, where we explore how this powerful combination transforms lives across industries like education, technology, venture capital, and sustainability. Today, we are speaking with Jake Wood. Jake Wood is simultaneously the co-founder and CEO of Groundswell. Groundswell is a social impact platform for companies that facilitates the donation process and also volunteering for nonprofits, in addition to a bunch of other features. Additionally, Jake is the co-founder and executive chairman of Team Rubicon. Team Rubicon is a nationwide nonprofit that recruits, organizes, trains, and deploys military veterans to quickly and effectively respond to natural disasters in the US and around the world. Let's dig in. Jake Wood, I'm so excited. I'm always nervous about going from the pre-talk to the actual talk, so it doesn't feel like a game show. All right, everybody, we're here. But Jake Wood is here, and I'm very, very excited to have you. Thank you.
Hey, man, thanks for having me on. It's good to reconnect.
It's always awesome. It's always, and I'm just going to say this for the purposes of anybody who might watch this video. Jake is considerably taller than I am. So now that I've put that in there, which is kind of how we met, because I was making fun of you for being so much bigger than me. All right, but that's not the purpose of why you came here. I'm going to jump right in, and this is going to be a really specific question based upon the work that you've done with Team Rubicon. Not so much with what you're doing with Groundswell, but my first question for you is, what inspired you to start using technology within the work that you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, my first go around as an entrepreneur was as a nonprofit entrepreneur running Team Rubicon, and we were doing our best to scale that organization kind of out of the shadow of the Great Recession, right? So founded in early 2010, economy was still in the dumps. Philanthropic giving was deflated, particularly for unproven, models like what we were trying to pioneer with TR. And so I think it also, though, provided this confluence of circumstances. One, technology was rapidly changing, right? You had the advent in the years prior of social media. Twitter was new. It's how the world was communicating and organizing. And that's really what Team Rubicon was doing, was organizing a movement. And so we saw that as this really interesting tailwind. It was just easier to be more technologically enabled during that time period. And of course, it's infinitely easier 15 years later today in 2025. But then there was just necessity. When you're a resource-starved organization, technology is an equalizer. And we saw that as something that we could harness. And then I think the third factor was our experience coming off the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan. The United States is the most technologically advanced military in the world. When there's a challenge we face on the battlefield, we either have a technology solution to help defeat it, or, there's billions of dollars in the DoD ready to be poured into research and development to defeat it. Mm-hmm. And so, as we were trying to build this organization on the premise of taking those battlefield lessons and applying them in a humanitarian context, it just made sense to take that same technology-driven approach. So I think all three of those things factored together, the availability of technology, the necessity to scale through it, and then finally that familiarity of fielding it in crazy austere environments to create asymmetrical advantages.
That is such a cogent answer. I came in, I was like, I'm going to ask you this question. And he's like, well, it was cool, and it was yes, I love it when people come on and they far exceed the brilliance that I was expecting out of them, which is a high bar. So I'm going to start off by saying something nice. This is going to go downhill quickly. How much, so along the lines of what you were talking about, the time period, so 2010, how much, because I'm trying to put my head in that place, even though that feels like it was 2 years ago. How much of how the presidential election around what Obama did with technology and organizing do you feel influenced how you thought of technology and using it with Team Rubicon?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I don't know that I've ever thought of it through that lens. I didn't even experience Obama's election. I was in Afghanistan.
Fair.
So
you weren't on Twitter.
So it's fascinating because I, of course, know what happened and I know what he pioneered. And I in the years after that, got to know some of the early, really senior leaders on that campaign. I guess, though, I haven't ever really thought about it through that lens. I guess in many ways we were, riding the coattails of what that campaign pioneered in terms of organizing without even really probably giving them the credit that they deserved like enjoying the fruits of that.
Yeah. I mean, another way of looking at it, especially because of what you were saying, like you were literally, on a battlefield, but there's something to be said for understanding or being able to see what was in the zeitgeist in that moment. That would be the most effective way to share your story and also to galvanize people to want to be a part of Team Rubicon. And so from my perspective, I think I learned about Team Rubicon maybe 2 years ago or a year ago. It's within the past 2 years. Like, I feel like last year when like you and I talked in Chicago, I got to know more about you and your organization. And since then I follow you on LinkedIn and you share all these amazing stories that aren't just about your personal history, but in the way that you're connecting to moments that are occurring and also your history around of building up Team Rubicon, the idea of going to Haiti, all of that. So maybe we'll put some links in the show notes, but I highly encourage people to follow Jake because he's actually a really inspiring person to follow in the social media sense. By the way, I will get back to insulting you, but right now I'm just saying nice things about you, which I'm sure
you have to. You don't want to turn away your viewers.
That's right. That's right. They're all on your side. I guess the next question I have for you, and you kind of talked about it a little bit, but I'm wondering if it goes deeper. How has your personal journey influenced your approach to leveraging technology for impact? And especially the idea that you were on the battlefield when this stuff really started to become part of all of our lives. I've spent a little time in the military, not as much as you, but there's definitely a bit of a severance or a disconnect from what is happening in popular culture versus what your immediate reality is and the work that you're doing. And then I will also say, I think you and I have talked about this, the Marines and their relationship to technology probably isn't as strong as some of the other armed forces. So that was the nicest way I could have said that.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't get all the cool toys, that's for sure.
So was there stuff like, as far as like growing up as a kid, like, where did this come from?
I mean, I think that's hard to say. My dad was definitely a tinkerer, right? Mm-hmm. And his dad, was an engineer, had a couple of patents for some mechanical things, nothing too crazy. But my dad was always kind of trying to build his own computer. I wouldn't say he was any good at it. In fact, like the running joke in our household was we were probably one of the first, houses on the block to have Wi-Fi and like a mesh network or whatever in the house. But it never worked. Right. And so we always joked up until he died, and we still joke. It's like our way of remembering him. Like anytime the Wi-Fi is not working in my mom's house, we talk about like the network as if it's like some sentient being haunting us. So, I guess, certainly exposed to it, but by no means, my dad worked in manufacturing. He wasn't a technologist. He was just a hobbyist. And I was never interested or particularly proficient in any of it. To take it to the Marine Corps and kind of your cheeky observation.
It wasn't cheeky. It wasn't cheeky. It was just an observation. Factual. I don't want Marines coming after me.
For people that don't have the context, the Marine Corps got, the smallest budget of any of the branches. And usually, we like to joke, we get the Army's hand-me-downs, and not entirely off base in saying that. I think actually, perhaps one of the lessons that came of my time in the Marine Corps and being overseas was technology is great until it's not. It's great until it fails. And so one of the things that the Marine Corps stresses and really impresses upon its Marines is excellence in the basics. Like you have to be able to do the low tech version of anything, and do it consistently, and with a high degree of fidelity if you ever expect to be augmented and enhanced through technology. So what do I mean by that? Like if you can't navigate by map and compass, you're probably actually not going to be that effective at doing it via GPS. Like you're going to be better at it, but like you're going to improve your ability to implement and deploy technology if you can do what it does without it. Does that make sense?
That makes that makes a ton of sense. And the analog I'll give to you around this, and this isn't something, I spent a long time as a professional musician, touring musician, I was recording voiceovers and doing all this stuff. And so I remember there was a point where studios all added computers. Mm-hmm. So prior to that, there was a guy in the studio who would cut the tape. And it was a really, that was a really specific job. You had to know how to do that. And there was a big mixing board. And so then once all the studios added computers, and then you would work with a different engineer, you could tell the difference between the person who had worked with tape and worked with the mixing board, as opposed to the kid, I shouldn't say that, as opposed to the person who just learned how to do it in the computer.
Yeah.
There was a nuance. Yeah. There was there was a level of understanding that wasn't immediately apparent on the digital side, that people who had that analog experience knew how to hack the digital systems to get the sounds that you wanted. And it feels like that's what you're describing.
Yeah, exactly.
And to that point where you talk about your dad and your grandfather being tinkerers, there's a level of people who, may not see this, but it feels this way with you, that the thing that you were doing was very tactile. The thing that with Team Rubicon, and we'll talk about Groundswell in a bit, the thing you were doing with Team Rubicon was very tactile. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Team Rubicon, there will be some links in the bio and all of that. But essentially, and correct me if I get this wrong, Team Rubicon organizes volunteers to go into areas of where natural disasters have taken place, to support people in a multitude of ways, whether it's cleanup, medical, what have you, whatever's needed in that moment that isn't actually being covered by the Red Cross or the military. It's like you're filling in that sweet spot in between.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you were using technology, to me, just feels like the mesh Wi-Fi that actually worked.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. I remember, even the first mission we ran in Haiti after the earthquake. It's so simple in hindsight. I'm going to tell you this story and you're going to be like, yeah, of course, that's how it worked. But we came across a semi-operable operating room. I mean, we're talking 5 days after the earthquake. There's people with amputated limbs everywhere. It's like a Civil War battlefield. It's the most horrific scene. And we're talking to this doctor, and hey, what do you need? What do you need? And he's like, what I really need is a CT scan machine. Mm-hmm. I'm like, there probably wasn't one in Haiti before the earthquake, let alone one after. Okay, how do we get one? I'm 26 years old, 60 days out of the Marine Corps. I don't even know what a CT scan does. I don't know what it looks for. I don't even know what it looks like.
Right.
So we go on Twitter, to your point, and we just we ask the world, who's got a CT scanner they're willing to donate? Found one out of Miami, some hospital. Hey, we got it. We got one. We just decommissioned it. Don't know. Like, okay, next problem. How do we get it to Haiti? Right, and so then we start asking the world, like, hey, who can help us transport this? And, we start crowdsourcing all these solutions. That doesn't necessarily scale, but it's really, again, thinking about, how do you, take the resources you do have and think outside the box. Now, fast forward 2 years, the organization's a lot more sophisticated. We're a real organization, a real NGO at this point. Hurricane Sandy hits New York.
Yep.
We deploy 500 volunteers into New York City, far Rockaways of Brooklyn and Queens.
Yep.
And I get a call from a guy that I had just met at a conference a few weeks before, working at Palantir, which was not yet a household name in technology. And he says, Jake, I've gotten permission from the CEO to send a team of engineers on the ground and help you guys out. And I'm like, hey man, I don't really understand. I don't know how you're going to help. And he's like, well, hey, we'll help you map the damage. And okay, I'm like, oh, okay. So you want to help us create intelligence. And obviously we know that that's what Palantir does. It's big data, it's intelligence. Mm-hmm. How that applied to what we were doing, we weren't sure, but we said, okay, fly to JFK, pack for a week. We'll pick you up. You better not be a drain on resources, and bring your smartest guy, because we're not going to have a lot of patience. And that's kind of how I put it to him.
I'm sorry.
He flew out. He flew out with 4 brilliant engineers. They stayed up all night drinking Mountain Dew, and they recoded an instance of their software, and we deployed it, 24 or 36 hours later to basically go out with Palantir enabled mobile devices and map the damage. Now, again, in hindsight, you're like, oh, okay, doing geospatial mapping of the disaster zone, that's pretty commonplace. Now, it had never been done before. I mean, that collaboration with Palantir was what single-handedly got us a seat at the table with FEMA and all the major disaster NGOs, because nobody had seen. Everybody was still walking around with paper pads,
doing drawing things out,
paper damage assessments, and they would hand them in to the EOC in downtown Manhattan. And who knows what happened with it then? But it wasn't getting collated and assembled into actionable intelligence.
What's EOC? I'm sorry, you went full military on me there.
Emergency Operations Center.
Thank you. Okay, there's first of all, you're not giving yourself enough credit, because I'll be honest, as you were telling that story, it did not seem obvious to me, because I've never been in a disaster site. So I don't have a checklist of things where I'm like, oh, we need to map that out. I actually think that's kind of brilliant. There's that part itself is actually kind of brilliant. And I personally would do this. I was like, oh, I got lucky, and this guy did this, and I spoke to this person. But and I'm sure now, you looking backwards, you see that through line. And part of it involved being affable enough to connect with that person at the conference, and being, sort of focused and clear enough about what your mission was as an organization, so that he was like, hey, you know what? I'm thinking of you. I met you. We can help in this way. You've inspired me in this way. And then there's the tinker piece that we just talked about, where it's like, all right, we're going to tinker with you guys coming down here. Don't waste my time. And the reason I was laughing is because if you have the pleasure of meeting Jake in person, he is an intimidating factor, but he's actually a teddy bear. But he's a big dude. So I'm picturing you yelling at someone on the phone, and they're like, do we want to go down there? Do we want to go to JFK? But yeah, there's a level there where you're not giving yourself enough credit. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. You've had some of this experience with Team Rubicon. You recognize, and I'm assuming, I'm going to let you talk about this a little bit more. You recognize sort of a gap or a problem that needs to be addressed in how funding gets from CSR departments to nonprofits or organizations similar to Team Rubicon. How do you go from being the guy, who speaks in all military jargon and just flies to Haiti because it's oh, I didn't get into business school, so I'm just going to go do this because this also feels equally meaningful, to essentially starting a tech company, but still viewing yourself as a tinkerer?
Yeah, well, I mean, I still haven't written a single line of code, so
fair.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think probably just I'm an entrepreneur at heart. After 11 years running Team Rubicon, I think I just came to the realization that I was ready for the next thing, and I, just big believer that, everybody as an individual needs to continue to evolve. Organizations need to continue to evolve. That includes the individuals within them. And I never Team Rubicon was the best job I ever had. It was amazing. It provided a comfortable life for my family and I. But I also felt like I would have been doing the organization a disservice if I just sat there and ran it for 40 years, because it would have just been out of comfort. Right. And I still love the organization. I'm still super involved, but I was ready for the next challenge. And I think that the organization was ready for the next phase. So I took some time and sat around and stared at the ceiling and thought about, who do I want to be when I grow up? And I think most entrepreneurs really frame the world through the problems that they see. And then which ones are they, foolish enough to convince themselves that they can solve, and then they go try to solve them. And so, yeah, I'd observed some inefficiencies in the philanthropy space, and saw that there was an opportunity to build something there on the technology side. And so we incorporated Groundswell 4 years ago. As with any startup, the vision has evolved in what we are and what we aspire to be. We really started out looking to build a platform that democratized access to these giving accounts called donor advised funds that up to, us, only rich people ever had access to. So we really wanted to make them a giving vehicle for the everyman. And then, of course, that product vision has evolved to be a more encompassing purpose platform for companies. But we're really excited about where we're at, and, continuing to innovate and drive forward. And hopefully at some point it's a viable, thriving business.
Now, first of all, that is, I think that's amazing on a lot of levels. And I'm sure people like this, and not judging, but if we're thinking in terms of a spectrum, I feel like in life I have several types of friends, and one end of the spectrum is what you just described. All right, I've gotten to this point, I'm comfortable, so I need to do something else because I'm getting bored and this isn't going to innovate or get any better. And at the other end of the spectrum, I've gotten to this point where I know what I'm doing, I'm comfortable. Why would I ever leave? I'm comfortable.
And sometimes I wonder why I'm not that guy. Sometimes
Me too. It's like, I was comfortable. What am I doing? You know? And so there's something I love meeting fellow crazies, if you will, or people who, you were saying an entrepreneur, innovator, whatever the case is, people who don't feel, and there's nothing wrong with being a custodian of something that's working. And I think that's a certain personality type, which I wish I could be. When I was younger, I wanted to be comfortable like everyone else, as opposed to being curious and wanting to find the next thing. So along those lines, it seems like with Groundswell, you've done an interesting job of sort of combining your social network with solving an organization or organizational needs through technology. How, I guess, and I'm trying to figure out the right way to frame this question. Do you see it that way? Do you understand how you are sort of merging where you were to where people's needs are and where you're going? And was there something that was like a tipping point for you around, was it just about the problem, or was it just like, hey, you know what? I have this and I have this. I can bring these two things together. Like, what was the thought process around building that outside of creating that opportunity for everybody to have the ability to donate to organizations in the way that you described?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we first launched our company, our intention wasn't to sell to these CSR leaders that we sell to now, the same people that, as you mentioned, were my social network, people I'd raised, hundreds of millions of dollars in grants and donations from. Because my perspective was they don't have any money, they don't have the budget, so we actually thought we were going to sell to HR leaders, and they've got the budget. They're the ones that control the benefits, and turns out HR leaders aren't a big fan of me, and and we had to quickly pivot back into CSR, which was where my people are. Yeah, I mean, listen, I had, I had a little black book of ideas that I was, that were percolating around in my head for problems that could be solved. But I think, one of the things that always terrified me about leaving the CEO job at Team Rubicon was I didn't want to just be any entrepreneur solving any problem. I wanted to do something that was purposeful. And so I looked at some of these problems, and they were intellectually stimulating. They were played to some different strengths that I developed running, a big global operation and nonprofit, but they weren't going to be as purposeful. And so, but as soon as I started thinking about Groundswell, it was clear that was going to be, the thing. The
next question I'm going to sort of dive into with you is more about human connection, because whether it is the digital platform that you're currently working with or what you did with Team Rubicon, it feels like human connection is the root at a lot of that. And so what things have you noticed, human ways, that have made you personally successful in connecting with people? And I'm going to add on to that, especially in scenarios where people are going through something traumatic.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at the end of the day, people want to feel seen and heard and cared for, just like any human being. And, I've always tried to lead that way. I think most people have a preconception of what a kind of a Marine Corps leader is and isn't. They probably imagine, Clint Eastwood barking at, a platoon of Marines. And in some ways you're not wrong, but, even that Marine that's barking orders and, making people do push-ups and run in their boots and all that stuff, there's this deep human connection within that band of brothers and sisters. They call it that for a reason. And I think, there's this great equalizer in military service where, one of the things the Marine Corps does really well is break down this sense of personal identity. I'm actually working on an article about this right now. Like, for 13 weeks at Marine Corps boot camp, you're not allowed to refer to yourself with a personal pronoun. You're not allowed to say I or me or my. It's the weirdest thing in the world. You refer to yourself as this recruit, right? So in this like weird third person, like this recruit needs to go use the restroom, or this recruit has a question. And, what they're really trying to do is break down this personal identity and create a shared identity across you as a Marine with all 180,000 Marines. Like you are all one and the same. And, the Marine Corps is not perfect. Let me say that before I go any further. There's a lot of problems there, but I do think that it creates this culture of inclusion, where despite being like an exclusive organization, not everybody can be a Marine, and they let you know that. Once you're in, it's ruled by this sense of inclusion where people are seen and heard and taken care of for who they are and what they represent to the whole, which is, part of that platoon and that warfighting machine and the mutual survival that comes and is necessary from that. And doesn't mean you have to like everybody you serve with, but you have to demonstrate to them that you are there to do everything you can to make them succeed. And I think if you kind of like sand down the rough edges of the Marine Corps, like it's a great leadership philosophy to take forward in how you interact with people. You help them feel seen and heard, and you help them by convincing them that you are there to help them on their journey through life, whatever that is. And, if you can do that consistently, then people will see you as someone that they can trust, someone that they can count on, someone that they can open themselves to. And that's where like true connection comes.
So along those lines, and this might be really close to I'm not sure exactly what the post is that you're writing. How have you incorporated those lessons into growing the communities of these two organizations that you have, I'm going to say, started or been on the ground floor of, however you want to frame it?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually what inspired me to start thinking about how to write it. We had at Team Rubicon the company-wide staff retreat recently, so a couple hundred people flew into LA to spend a week going through the annual strategy. And as chairman of the board, I went over there a couple times to show my face, have some conversations, lead a few sessions. And one evening, I was up there with the current CEO, and it was kind of a ask me anything type town hall. Mm-hmm. And with the change in current administration, which I don't necessarily want to get into, like as one of the things obviously is like an attack on DEI, and some, one of our staff members asked, hey, what are we going to do about this? Are we going to retreat back from, our initiatives around DEI? And I tried to kind of reframe it a little bit. We never really had much in the way of like a formal DEI policy. Like we spoke about issues of diversity. We had, working groups around the issue, as many organizations did, and for a variety of reasons, to include like real operational reasons. A lot of the communities that we work in are Black and Hispanic communities. And if you show up with a bunch of white people, like, guess what? You're just not as effective. And so put aside, like, what's the right thing to do? Like, let's just focus on operational capabilities and you can reach the same conclusion. So again, it doesn't matter. But in responding to the question, I kind of framed it not as DEI, but IED, which is interesting because military veterans have a very fraught relationship with that acronym for different reasons. And talked about how from the very beginning, what we tried to build at Team Rubicon was a culture of inclusion. And I reminded everybody that on that first mission to Haiti, we had 8 people that crossed from the Dominican Republic into Haiti. Only 2 of us had ever met one another before. A third was like a friend of a friend that I, and then we ran into 4 people along the way who literally just said, okay, we're going to go with you. It was like a motley crew, but the crew that ended up being assembled was, a couple of Marines, a civilian firefighter, a Hispanic doctor, a gay doctor, an Army Special Forces medic. Pretty diverse in some regards, right? Not perfectly diverse. There were no women on that team, right? And a Jesuit priest, by the way. So it was an eclectic group. And I often say to people, like, the start of Team Rubicon is a couple of Marines, a gay doctor, and a priest walk into an earthquake.
I was going to say, it sounds like the opening to a joke. It really does.
Exactly. And so, again, like diverse in its own way. And I still remember the first time that doctor came out to me. In a conversation, like very casually, he was an Army veteran from the Vietnam era. But he referenced, oh, my partner, he's doing this, and I think it was kind of this like
a litmus test, even like just sort of like to see how.
Hey, I want to test how is this young alpha male Marine going to respond to this? And obviously it didn't bat an eye, but it was just so important to me that he know that, right? And that moving forward, that anybody who, the only litmus test for whether or not you could be a part of Team Rubicon is, are you here to serve and are you an asshole? First one was a requirement. Second one was a complete non-starter. And that was it. Like that was it. And so, I kind of expanded upon this in this setting with the all hands. I said, so it started with this sense of inclusion. From there, we wanted to build a meritocracy. It was all about like, does everybody have equitable access to participate and to lead in this organization? And one of the things we were always really proud of was, we were always, almost from the beginning, nearly 50-50 in male-female leadership within our volunteer ranks. Mm-hmm. It wasn't quite 50-50. It might've been 45-55. But when you look at like only 18% of the military is female, this was like way over indexing on female representation in our leadership. It wasn't because we were filling quotas. It's because we gave them equal opportunities to step up and lead. And I'll still remember, this was probably a decade ago. We were doing like this listening session, and we had it was around gender equity within the organization, and we had a bunch of volunteers and volunteer leaders on this big conference call, and we were, again, this listening session. Hey, safe space, say what you want. And this volunteer from the South spoke up, and he started talking. He said, I have to admit, he's an older guy. I think he was a Vietnam vet. He's like, I have to admit, when I first started in Team Rubicon, I didn't feel like women could lead. He said the quiet thing out loud. And I kind of, okay, where's this going? And then he kept talking. He's like, listen, and he goes, and over the course of the last 2 years, I have learned more about leadership from my female colleagues than I've ever learned about leadership anywhere in my 60 years on this earth. He goes, I have met the most fantastic leaders. And it was just his like acknowledgement of his biases coming in, which was great. So again, our inclusion then led to this idea of equity. And then ultimately, like, we have an organization that is pretty diverse. It's not perfectly diverse, and I'm not going to sit here and say that we're a perfect representation of the US population, but that's never been the goal, right? We have a place where people can come regardless of how they look, who they love, who they pray to, doesn't matter. We've got people across that entire spectrum who serve proudly and openly as they are within our organization. And so, that's how I think about it. That's how we've approached it. And again, not perfect, but I think we've done a pretty damn good job.
Yeah. Okay. And so I feel like I keep adding these caveats, but that's really because, one, what you're sharing is so powerful that it's hard to not either chime in or just co-sign it. There's so much there about what you said around what you look like versus what your intention is. And one of the things that I was having this conversation with someone just the other day, the thing that I enjoy most about life, the thing that gets me out of bed every day is the ability to be wrong, whether it be about a person, about a thing, or just, feeling that I have not figured it out yet, which is great because I'm so far away from it. And even when I first met you, not even met you, when I first saw you, I was like, oh, I know that dude, big jock guy. I know what he's about. And you continually surprise me with your thoughtfulness, and you probably wouldn't call it this, but you really model this amazing inclusiveness in this very, for lack of a better term, very male way, in a really, really good way. And I know that, like, not that we were getting political at all, but in the last election, there was a lot of talk of what masculinity should look like and what it is and what it should look like, and what happens on X and all of that. And one of the things that I'm sure, if you don't hear it, you should probably hear it more, but I'm sure you hear it a lot. You really retain who you are, who I think you would be, in addition to adding this level of intentionality and empathy and inclusiveness in a really amazing, but yet masculine way. I don't know if I'm capturing this, but you know what I mean? It's sort of like a lot of people are like, oh, if you're a dude and you're not, if you don't really come across like a bro, then you're weak,
Yeah.
or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you like ride this line in this like beautiful way. And I love that you are a really great example of positive masculinity for not just me, people. I mean, I feel like I'm probably even older than you, but other people. Like you are the role model that these kids, and I just sounded old saying that, but kids on like X and Twitter and all that should be seeing, where it's like, you can be yourself, but you can also be open to, how did you frame it? Whoever you pray to, whoever you love, as long as you're not an asshole and as long as you're there to serve. Like it is really, really amazing.
Well, the world's pretty simple at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's not hard to navigate this earth and do the right thing.
It can be. Let's not, let's just say you and I are in New York trying to catch a cab. One of us is going to catch the cab first, and it's not based upon height.
No, I listen, I know that. I know that for a fact. I know it. I've seen it, and it blows my mind. And I will never not acknowledge that as a reality for the people in my life that look different than me.
But that's my point. Like, you don't have to, and you do, but you do it in a way that's really authentic to who you are. So I'm going to ask you one last question, and I'm going to let you go because I've taken up so much of your time, and I truly appreciate you coming, joining me for this chat. And this one's a hypothetical. Someone gave me this advice the other day about asking hypothetical questions. You said this is year 4, for Groundswell, right?
Yep.
And Team Rubicon, you were leading that for 5 years, 6 years?
11 years.
11 years.
11.
All right.
Yeah.
11. So we're going to fast forward 7 years. You're like, all right, great. I've done this for 11 years. I have my next idea of the thing that I'm going to do. And what you do, I'm sure it'll be great. But specifically what it is, you don't have to worry about now. The question I have for you is, how do you continue to cultivate the empathy and the intentionality that you just described within your next team and organization? You're starting this next thing. You have the people there. You've hired the people, and you're about to launch into the first big project. How do you set the tone for your team? What are the things that are integral for you to share, for people to acknowledge, for you to know, all right, we're going to be just as successful as these last two ventures, not just, as far as impact, but also as far as like being open to having so much diversity within your team?
I don't know, man. I mean, the world, imagine what the world's going to be like 7 years from now.
Oh, who knows? Who knows? 7 minutes.
Yeah.
But I'm saying pulling from your history, because you said in the beginning of the conversation, it's like, oh, all of this seems pretty obvious right now. And you see and even through this conversation, I've gotten a clearer understanding, not only of who you are as a person, but why you've been successful. And some of it you're going to call luck, or some of it you're going to call instinctual, or it's simple. What are, if there's 2 or 3 things, you're like, these are mandatory things that have to be foundational to my next organization and how we interact with people, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it starts with the same thing. You early on in any endeavor, you can be really discriminatory based off of values and alignment to vision. And, that's hard to scale. Right. But, particularly when you're building out that founding team, you just look for those folks who have demonstrated throughout their life, not necessarily through their wins and losses, but just through the challenges that they've tackled. And, it can be through their wins and losses, but less about what they are and more about how they handled them, to determine, is this the type of person that I want to spend more hours in a week with than I do with my own family? And that's the litmus test. I spend, 12 hours a day working. And I get, 2 to 3 hours a day with my kids Monday through Friday and, the weekends. But, that's just kind of the lens I look at it through. Do I want to give up time with my family for you? I'm going to do that for everybody.
Yeah. I mean,
but I'm fortunate that I've been able to build teams for the most part where the answer is not necessarily that I want to give up time with my family for them, but it's understanding that you have to work. It's palatable to go and spend that time with these people.
Yeah. Yeah. Jake Wood, Groundswell, Team Rubicon, overall, giant teddy bear of a person. I so appreciate your time, your ability to share your wisdom and your experiences today. And as I said earlier, definitely if you're within the LinkedIn space, Jake Wood is someone you should be following. If you are, and you can jump in and correct me on any of this, if you feel the calling to support communities in times of disaster, and Jake, I know you're in LA, so this is a perfect example of an area that was probably close to home where this happened. Please check out Team Rubicon. I'm sure you can go directly to the website.
Easy to find.
Yeah. Easy to find. And then finally, and this is really weird, whether you want to, and this is more about Groundswell, whether you're in an organization and you're in that CSR space and you're looking for a more effective way to, and correct me if I'm wrong, track and to deploy funds to amazing nonprofits like Team Rubicon, you should also be checking out Groundswell. Did I capture everything today?
You nailed it. Except for the teddy bear comment. Yeah. Remember, not masculinity.
Big masculine teddy bear. Just... All right. With that being said, for those of you who listen, thank you for listening. Definitely check out Jake Wood, an amazing person to get to know and to follow. Jake, thank you for your time. And that's it. We're out. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir, for having me.